But at the end of the day, human beings are emotional beings, right? We make decisions every day based on emotional thinking. I think the interesting thing about humans is that we are kind of intrinsically irrational, right? Actually, for me, and I think every designer probably works in a different way. For me, it's always geometry. The geometry is the foundation and the basis of the quality of the ride. You could have the lightest bike, the stiffest bottom bracket, and all those other things that people talk about. So we've always felt that, being a small brand, we've developed everything around purposely being boutique, right? We sell only frame sets. And the idea is that when you sell a frame set, every bike that's out there, every Chapter 2 bike that's out there is completely unique and different to that individual. Because, you're sitting down, working with a dealer, speccing every component, every detail that fits your personal needs.
Welcome everyone to the PhD podcast, where we explore high performance in sport, business, and life. Today we're diving into the art of engineering of designing speed, how bikes can be more than machines, and what it takes to create something that performs at the highest level while carrying its own soul. My guest today is Mike Pryde from Chapter 2 Bikes, and I am very honored to have you here, Mike. Welcome.
Hi, Fernando. Hi, everybody. It's Mike Pryde here from Chapter 2. I'm the founding member of Chapter 2, based here in Auckland, New Zealand, which we started in 2017.
And when exactly, the idea of Chapter 2 shift from dream to reality? Were you always on bikes, or how did that happen?
Yeah, well, as a kid growing up in Hong Kong, where my father moved to from Auckland, I always was messing around on bikes. BMX was a big part of my childhood. I was a 70s kid, so in the 80s, I was out on my BMX, building ramps, building dirt ramps, and I raced BMX for many years. And then when I moved to the UK to study architecture, I then started racing mountain bikes. That was in the kind of the early 90s when mountain biking was going through a big boom. So biking was always in my DNA. And then after returning to Hong Kong in 1996, having graduated from architecture school, I started racing road bikes as well as also racing mountain bikes semi-professionally. So, cycling is definitely a huge part of my life. And because my design education throughout school and architecture, puts kind of two and two together, both design and my passion for cycling. And it's a really nice synergy that I've been able to develop. And it's a lifestyle that I've really enjoyed.
Right. Did you have a specific influence, like someone before, starting designing the frames, the bicycles? Someone you look up to?
Yeah, I think in terms of design and architecture, there were some real icons in the design field. And I guess, Norman Foster, the architect from the UK, who I had the pleasure to work with when I graduated from university on the Hong Kong International Airport, that had a huge influence on the way I design, the way I think, the way I develop my ideas. And I think design really it's about process. And architecture teaches you a lot of discipline. I think, all the different design fields in the world, whether you're doing graphic design, industrial design, or architecture, I think because of the scale of most projects that I was involved in, and also the budgets involved and the timelines that were involved, you had to be incredibly disciplined. And that's helped me develop a way of thinking, which has lended itself really well to bicycle design.
Right. The whole I don't have a favorite Chapter 2 model. I like them all. Yeah. And is that what moment made you look at a bike and think, this is more than a transport, this is art, and I can make it better?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because, I think a lot of companies, will try and spin the story that, bicycle design is all about engineering, right? But at the end of the day, human beings are emotional beings, right? We make decisions every day based on emotional thinking. I think the interesting thing about humans is that we are kind of intrinsically irrational, right? Because if we were 100% rational human beings, we would only decide things based on its cost effectiveness, right? So there's a thing that we need, which is a utility thing. It needs to serve a certain purpose. And what color it is, what it looks like shouldn't really matter, right? If we were rational, I have a budget, I have a function that I need, make a decision. Beauty of human beings is that we are driven by emotions, which is why brands exist. Because without emotion, there is no brand. So I think in developing Chapter 2 and the design language that goes around everything that we do, we've tried to always create something that always resonates back to who we are as a brand and what we aspire to be, which is designing and developing high performance products that are also very, very beautiful to look at. And the beautiful part is where the emotive section of the whole equation is, which for us is a really important part of the whole DNA.
Do you think this is the gap you were determined to feel like? Because there's a lot of bike brands, and pretty much like daily we see a new one.
I think just to jump in there, I think when you compare the industry as a whole, there's a number of the really big players, right? And we all know the names, the Specialized, Treks, and Savellos, Canyon. They've been heavily invested in professional racing for many, many years. And those bigger brands have a lot of momentum because if you can imagine the amount of people who watch the Tour de France, either live on the side of the road or on TV, it's an enormous audience that they're reaching, right? And small brands like us don't have that opportunity. So it's a case of really thinking, okay, these brands have this huge amount of momentum and let's say advantage through professional racing, whether it's product development or marketing. You can coin it the way you want, but at the end of the day, they're exposed to a huge audience. So how do we as a small brand and other small brands like us stand out amongst a very crowded marketplace, right? We could easily go out there and develop technology, measure the products that are out there at the Tour de France in terms of stiffness and weight and replicate it. It's not that difficult. And the factories are very sophisticated these days and we could probably achieve. But at the end of the day is that performance and marketing and sales are all interconnected. You cannot disconnect that. So as a brand that's not at the Tour de France, not reaching those, hundreds of millions of people who watch the Tour de France, our biggest differentiator is really the aesthetics of the product, right? We're confident that our products are as good as those big brands because we benchmark against them. We use the same materials and same processes to manufacture our products. But how do we stand out in this hugely crowded competitive market? So the aesthetics has been a very big part of why we do what we do. We look at our frames, and when many people look at our frames, it almost looks like a custom painted frame because the details and the quality of the graphics and the painting is so high. But actually, for us, that's just
Indeed, yeah.
that's our normal way of just developing great products.
They're beautiful. What comes first when designing a frame? Like for you, the performance metrics, arrow stiffness, weight, or the story you want the bike to tell?
Actually, for me, and I think every designer probably works in a different way. For me, it's always geometry. The geometry is the foundation and the basis of the quality of the ride. You could have the lightest bike, the stiffest bottom bracket, and all those other things that people talk about. But if the foundation of the frame, which is the geometry, isn't well dialed, the bike is just not going to feel right when you're riding it. So, we developed back in 2017 when we started a way of putting our geometry where if you were to plot the stack and reach dimension on a chart is actually a straight linear line. So, the way it works is that basically you have the bottom bracket, you have the seat tube coming from it. And that effectively is a telescopic type of mechanism because you've got different seat tube angle remains unchanged. and the seat tube just gets longer. And then you've got the seat post that also extends. So that becomes telescopic, right? So the taller the person is, the bigger the frame and the longer the seat tube. Whereas, there were definitely a time in the past when frame designers had different seat tube angles based on different sizes. So with that philosophy that we have, then the stack and reach is basically linear, because as a person gets taller, their upper torso gets proportionally longer. So therefore, the stack and reach, it makes sense for it to be linear. So we developed that. We were not the first to do it. I mean, we felt that it was the right thing for us to do, and we've used it since day one. But with the Rearer, which we launched just in January this year, we went a little bit step further, where even the bottom bracket drop is also linear. So as the frame size changes, the bottom bracket drop also changes. And this lends it to new trends, because now, of course, crank lengths are getting shorter and shorter. So now it's all very, very kind of proportional in terms of the taller the person is, the whole geometry changes accordingly. So I think that's something that we think is the foundation of any design. And then after that, of course, it is, really trying to dial in what the key performance metrics are. And those are the bottom bracket stiffness, head tube stiffness, the stiffness of the dropout, and probably more importantly, also the weight that's related to all those things. And for each different genre of bike, whether it's an aero bike, a lightweight bike, a gravel bike, those things will change, because, if you look at it two extremes, you've got a stiff race and crit bike where you want everything to be really stiff and tight. Then you've got a gravel bike where you're riding on much more undulating, bumpy surfaces, where vertical compliance is more important. So then stiffness needs to be dialed back accordingly, because otherwise the bike becomes a very jarring type of experience to ride, and it's just not comfortable. And that jarring effect also makes you more tired during the ride. So it really is trying to dial in who the audience is, right? The genre that I talk is really an audience, right? It's a person who's buying a specific bike for a specific reason. So maybe they live in a very flat area, rolling terrain. So an aero bike is more suited. Or maybe you live, in the French Alps where you like to go climbing every day. That's a slightly different bike as well. So, geometry and those key metrics that we develop and use and evolve over time are the key components. And then the next layer on top of that is probably the form factor, right? So how the tube profiles are designed, the sectional properties and stuff like that. But that's all related back to performance as well. So you really can't kind of take those things apart and look at them in isolation. They're all really interconnected. And then the final layer, which is, I guess, the emotional part of it, is really the graphics, the way we want to present ourselves. And I've always been a kind of a designer which has had this idea that when you see a Chapter 2, it should be instantly recognizable from a distance, right? So when you see somebody ride past on a Chapter 2, it's kind of like, wow, that's a Chapter 2. But the pleasure of owning one is when you get to see the details. So as a person that sees one riding past, or you're riding with a bunch of guys, then you see somebody on a Chapter 2, it's distinctive, it looks different. But as an owner, you get the opportunity to really explore that frame, because it's in your hand the moment that you buy it.
Mm-hmm.
And you have all these small little details on the inside, like underneath the crown of the fork, where it's not normally exposed. And we have these small little details, small little graphics on the inside of the fork and the chainstays. And that's a very personal thing that only the owner gets to see. So it's really kind of a two-step thing. It's about what it looks like from a broader distance, but what it's looked like actually to own one. Two very different experiences.
So you have the geometry and like the rider in mind already when you start designing a frame. Is that how you do usually?
Yeah, and a lot of people, a lot of it comes down to personal preference as well, right? Because I've been riding bikes and racing bikes for years, and I certainly wouldn't ride a bike that I didn't want to ride myself, right? So it's all about. I mean, in many essence, the audience is me, right? What do I want to ride? Because if I don't put a product out there in the market that I'm super proud of, it almost doesn't make sense, right? I mean, as a brand, we should be proud of what we do. So we always not only look at who our customers are, but also it's what do we want to do? I mean, myself and many of our staff members and dealers and distributors, we're all riders. We all know what we like. So, it's really trying to develop something that we are proud to be out there producing, designing, and selling that also relates heavily to a consumer base.
Yeah, and in the end of the day, like, you know, we're looking for sales for numbers, and eventually, you are competing against the giants. So how do you decide when to innovate or where to hold back?
Um, yeah, it's interesting because, in the reason why Chapter 2 is called Chapter 2 is that before Chapter 2, there was a brand called Pryde, which is my father's business. So I ran the bicycle part of their business, which I started back in 2008. And one thing that we realized is that if you didn't have the marketing and the product together at the same time, it almost doesn't work because, we designed a triathlon time trial bike at Pride, and we actually engaged with a couple of ex-Cervelo employees, engineers, to help on the project. And we designed a really fast bike called the Bayamo. And, we put it in the San Diego wind tunnel. We had exactly the same components, the wheels, the handlebar system, identical to the Cervelo P3 of that particular generation, and we were significantly faster than they were, right? And and the numbers don't lie. You put something in a wind tunnel, the data is the data, and you could make some pretty strong comparisons between two different products. But if you don't have athletes racing at the highest level at, say, Kona, the world triathlon events and stuff like that, it almost doesn't make any sense. So, we when we came to Chapter 2, we took a conscious decision that we wouldn't go into pro racing, and for a couple of different reasons. One was the cost of doing it is incredible. I mean, if
It
you were
is.
to get the Tour de France level, you're talking minimum, 2 to 3, often 4 million euros. That's just the cash component. So you're giving the teams cash in order to
Yeah.
then put them to
There's
operate the
an
team.
entry fee. Yeah,
Yeah, it's an entry fee. And then after that, you're talking 150 to 200 bikes. It's a massive investment. And for a small
it
brand,
is.
it just doesn't make any sense. But also, I always had this philosophy that if you go down that route of sponsoring pro teams, it's very difficult to exit as well. Because when you exit that after 5 or 6 years, the optics of it is that you're not doing well, or the team doesn't want to ride your products. Therefore, you
Yeah.
exit. But there'll be a business reason why a company would have to exit, right? Because of
Hmm.
financial reasons normally. But the optics of it, as far as the consumer is concerned, is very, very negative. So we've always felt that being a small brand, we've developed everything around purposely being boutique, right? We sell only frame sets. And the idea is that when you sell a frame set, every bike that's out there, every Chapter 2 bike that's out there is completely unique and different to that individual. Because, you're sitting down working with a dealer, specing every component, every detail that fits your personal needs. And those personal needs can be very different things, right? It could be budget, it could be weight, it could be performance, it could be the fact that you had some old components already. But we're really all about pro choice. It's about giving the consumer the idea that they can develop something and build something, their dream bike, so to speak, that is just for them. Whereas if you look at the big players, for them it's all about just volume, right? They get into this game where they're heavy on staff, they're heavy on infrastructure, so the volume game is critical to their survival. So, and everybody knows that selling a complete bike is a much bigger, high volume business. So they chase up volume through offering complete bikes. But of course, complete bikes often come with a certain amount of compromise because somebody, a an accountant, a bean counter, and the product manager has sat down and looked through every small little detail, cranks, wheels, rims, tires, grip tape, and all those little dollars and cents will affect the margin of a product, and they've made those conscious decisions that may or may not be to the benefit to the end consumer. So we're pretty simple. It's like, we're just a frame company. We know what we're doing with the frame. We design really great frames, which are beautiful, but you work with the dealer to get the exact bike that you want there and ride with.
Great. Three personal questions before we move to the next section. How light is the new frame?
So the interesting thing about this bike is that when we developed the Rera, about 18 months ago, we always knew that we wanted to do what we called the ultra version. At the time, we didn't call it ultra, but the idea was that using the same molds, we could actually have two different grades of frame. We had a lightweight one and we had a super light one. Um, we launched the Rera in January, which is 945 grams. I mean, it's light, but it's definitely not the lightest in the marketplace. But we always had in mind that, okay, we could get to a lighter frame without compromising stiffness. So then once we launched this, we continued to work on the carbon fiber layup, which is all the different pieces of carbon fiber that goes into a frame. Typically, there's 300 plus pieces of carbon that goes into a frame. But also a couple of decisions that we made on the Rera Ultra was that we swapped out the threaded bottom bracket to a press fit. So we removed the aluminium inserted parts from the bottom bracket area to lighten the frame. And we still, put quite a lot of carbon in that area to maintain the stiffness. And then we also have a lighter painting system to make sure that we can hit that really lightweight frame. So, this one here, is just under 700 grams. So it's 250 grams lighter than the Rera, and it feels different. So this one, I kind of cheated a bit. I guess as a founding member of the business, I felt I might as well enjoy some of the privileges that come with it. So this is actually a Rera Ultra that's been painted look like a Rera. So when this came out in January, it was already a Rera Ultra. It was one of the prototypes that we have. And with those Princeton carbon works and some of the other components that I have on there, it's a really light bike and it's just beautiful to ride in the mountains.
Great. Do you have a favorite model?
Yeah, I've always been a diehard aero fan. So out all the years, we've had 7 or 8 models since we started in 2017, and I've always gravitated back to the aero model. The first one that we had was the Rare, which is a much more, I guess it almost looks old fashioned now, right? It had external cables going from the top tube to the handlebar. We even had a rim version of that, and didn't have an integrated handlebar. And then we brought out the Coco, a couple of years ago, and that was always my go-to bike. It just feels fast through the wind, and it's still stiff and light enough to be up in the mountains. And with the kind of downhill racing that I did in mountain biking back in the day, I just love to be able to fly down mountains quickly, and the Coco just did everything. But I must say that, since I kind of built this up in January, I've been riding this a lot. And, we have some aero features on our lightweight frame as well. So we took a lot of what we learned from Coco and we applied it to the Vera. I think, with any design team, we have a deadline, obviously. And at the end of the day, a product's got to come to market at a particular time because design is never finished, right? It can go on literally forever. There's always an idea that comes to mind. There's always a better way to do things. Either way, either because technology has changed or, you've had a new idea whilst you've been out riding on your bike. In a business, you have to make a decision that a product has to come to market at a particular moment. So, it comes to market and almost like every time we launch a new product, it's in the market, people are buying it, people are going out there enjoying it. And then I'm kind of thinking, what, maybe there was something that we could have done a little differently or
Yeah,
better.
imagine.
So that kind of gets stored in here somewhere. And the
Yeah,
next time we start a new project, we bring it back out and we try and apply it to a new project. And it could be a completely different genre, whether it's a gravel bike or an aero bike or a crit bike. But every time you design something new, there's a learning process, and that is how we develop better products over time.
yeah. Last one about you know technical details. Then we move to the other questions. Which model has the highest, the taller front?
Yeah, the,
What
the
are they?
tallest one is all of what we call our all road bike, right? You're talking about the road bikes, the all road bikes. So, we've seen that. So firstly, I think our philosophy has always been designing bikes for real people, right? I think the really big brands who have such a huge investment in pro team racing, their
Hmm.
bikes are clearly fantastic bikes, and there's not a lot of bad bikes out there. But geometry wise, obviously the pro riders, they're taller, they're leaner, they're significantly more flexible than your average person. Even the average, high level rider get down really low and they can ride and maintain power at a very aggressive position. But between me and you, we're not like that. There's this thing called a stomach that often gets in the way when you're out
It
riding.
does.
But we've always designed what we call real geometry. The head tube stack dimension is a little bit higher. The reach is a little bit shorter for the same size bike. And that's
Hmm.
really, you know, really just about aligning the philosophy that, we're designing real bikes for real people. So, that's why, our all-road bike, the geometry is a little bit more upright, let's say. It's still a fun, aggressive bike, but it's just a little
Hmm.
more upright than some of
Yeah.
the big things that you might see at the Tour de France. But back to your question of which one has the highest head tube, the gravel bike geometry is quite different from the road bikes, and that will have a higher head tube and a shorter reach. And that's just because gravel bike riding, you're much more upright. Aerodynamics is maybe not the key. And also, with stability over bumpy surfaces, you do want a geometry that's suited for those needs. And actually, we have quite a lot of our customers who buy our Kaha, which is our gravel racing frame, and actually fit it with road racing wheels.
Yeah.
Because
Thought
best of
so.
was, and often what people do is they have two sets of wheels. They have a road set and a gravel set. On a weekend they can just swap them out and go do different things, which is really great.
Great. Just one bike, quiver, perfect. I've always enjoyed your, philosophy of performance. What has designing bikes taught you about performance, not on only on the road, but in leadership and business?
Um, I think any person who's leading a business has to lead by example. And I think that's really important because, you know, we're a very flat company. We're still a very, very small company with not that many staff, but, you have to create the right culture within the company. And I think when you're in the sports business, it's always a mix between your passion for the sport, which is really important because that's what gets you up in the morning. That's what gets you excited about designing new products. But at the end of the day, the other side, the devil on this side of the shoulder is that you're running a business, right? And it needs to be a business that's paying its bills. It needs to be profitable. It needs to be able to invest in the future. And those two things don't often align well, right? A lot of people say, oh, you should never follow your passion in business. But in the sports business, unfortunately, that's kind of almost the norm, right? We do it
It
because we
is.
so, coming back to my point by leading by example, I mean, I ride 3 times a week and have no issues with my staff getting out there and riding bikes as long as, when they get back, they're fully energetic and ready to sit in front of the desk and do some work. And I think, between myself and, people that we work with in Australia and America and Canada, we have this kind of combined energy around cycling, which is what really drives the business. We love what we do, but at the end of the day, is the one that we measure more importantly than anything else because that's the air that we breathe that keeps the business going. So you need to really kind of balance those two things. So yeah, it's hard because the bicycle industry is obviously going through some extremely tough times at the moment. We had COVID where people sold a lot of product, but then we had this big demand drop after that and this huge spike in inventory. So everybody's battling the same battle, and the bigger companies will have their own problems, because of scale. The smaller companies will have their problems because of lack of scale, if you like. So
Hmm.
hopefully at the end of 2024, everybody thought, okay, well, maybe we're going to get out of these troubles pretty soon. Now we're, August, almost September, and we're thinking, okay, it's
Yeah.
probably going to be 2026. So it's really just, getting down to basics, which is designing great products, producing good marketing, be active in the
Hmm.
community, and helping people solve their problems, which are we want to buy a Chapter 2. What's the best model? How do I get it? What's the best size? And I think as the founder of the business, I'm in quite a unique situation because, when you go on our website and you go onto WhatsApp to contact us, or you go into our live chat feature on the website, it's me, right? People are talking to me, and that's quite a unique experience, right? Because you go to Canyon, it's probably a bunch of people who are handling all the different inquiries that come through and specialize similarly, and that's they have big bike problems because they're big companies. But as a small boutique player, it's a very personal experience. And I'm often helping out customers with trying to help them select, what the best sizing is. Because, sizing is a tricky thing for a lot of consumers.
It is.
But we have some tools that, within our business where with some simple dimensions such as, height and inseam and some other dimensions, we're able to give, very, very accurate advice about sizing. And also, it's that sense of connection that I have with a lot of our consumers that makes my job pretty, exciting to do. I wake up in the morning because in the inbox there's all these consumers, who want to talk to me and talk about bikes, and we love talking about bikes.
Right. Yeah. Little bit on around pressure as a founder. How do you like personally handle it as a founder? Under pressure.
Very, very tough. I mean, I think any industry that you go in, the founder or founders, because my father and I were partners in the business. Um, you in the good times, of course, you take the benefits, right? So you're making a good income, and if the business is turning a profit, you can take some dividends out of it or whatever. But of course, when the times are tough, you also have the burden of keeping it going, right? Which means cutting salaries, putting cash into the business, and stuff like that. So there's two sides of the coins. But obviously, the rough period that we're going through now, um, you know, has been fairly long, right? Since 2023. And I guess, everybody deals with pressure in a different way. And the interesting thing is as a cyclist, you know, it almost sounds wrong to go out riding when times are tough and times are really hard. But, getting out there in the morning and just, even if it's for 45 minutes or an hour, doing a couple of hill reps or whatever it is, it's amazing that effect that it has when you come back
Indeed.
after you've had a shower and a smoothie. You're switched on, you're ready to go because, somehow that connection back to being on the bike is so energizing that it keeps you going and motivated. And I say, people deal with pressure in different ways. Some people like to maybe go for a walk. Some people just sit in front of the desk and they think that looking at their inbox longer will change the situation. But I've always found
Yeah.
that you just get out there. And, it's interesting because when tough times are tough, and obviously, the frustration is on your face, right? And the family can see it. My wife often says, Mike, you need to get out on your bike. And she's always right. Get out there, smash out a couple
Now.
of kilometers, come back for a nice coffee, and then you're good to go.
Yeah. I hear you. Yeah. Legacy. Um, you you're creating bikes. Uh, what do you hope lasts? For you
Yeah.
and for the end client.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not here to leave a legacy as such. I mean, there's far more famous people in the bike industry than me, but I think what I think the takeaway that I think a consumer hopefully gets from buying a Chapter 2 and riding a Chapter 2 is that they've bought something that's quite unique, quite different, and it has a boutique experience from the actual purchasing process, right? Like I said before, you're talking to people who are very passionate about cycling. You're often talking to me about what your needs are and, and stuff like that. But, at the end of the day is, people should just go out there and enjoy riding because, if you look at all the press, people are talking about watts and grams, it's cycling for me has almost become too scientific, right?
Indeed. Yeah.
Every brand that comes out with a new product, there's these lofty claims of this is the fastest bike in the world. I mean, what is the fastest bike in the world?
Exactly.
We're not talking about cars, right? Because with a car, you've got an engine, you've got aerodynamics, you've got other factors. But at the end of the day, the action of just putting your foot on the gas, you know, that is measurable, right? Humans are, and every person is different. There is no one bike that is good for everybody, right? So I think some of the lofty claims are, they're just marketing, hate to say it, it's just marketing bullshit, right? The best bike out there is the one that you're gonna go out there and enjoy the riding most. You know, we ride for
Great.
smiles,
Yeah.
we often say. When you come back after smashing yourself for 3 hours and you sat on the desk, or on your sofa, you're having a coffee, and you're excited about what you've just been out doing, that's the right bike. And often,
It is.
we have consumers that start chatting to me on our website, and they're tossing up between, say, a Coco, which is our aero bike, and the Toa, which is our previous all-road bike. And they can't really decide which one to buy. Right? They say, "Oh, you know what? I like aero bikes, but actually, there's some big mountains where I live." Often the answer is, "Listen, the bike that you walk into your garage in the morning and excites you because it looks a certain way, it feels a certain way, that's the one you should buy." Right? Because, going back to the original point, humans are emotional people. I think when a bike excites you because of the way it rides or because of the way it looks, just buy that one. I mean, you go into a bike shop, there's so much choice. You know, After all the
Hmm.
marketing, you're always going to gravitate to the one that visually you think looks the nicest. So let's be honest, just do that.
Great. One before we go on, um, I don't want to, finish that, but just are, are all carbon frames handmade from any brand? It's just a personal question.
Yeah. So some of the marketing that you see from some of the brands, they're making these claims that every frame is handmade. And, the reality is that that is the only way to make frames.
Still,
The
yeah.
bike
Okay.
industry is, you know, the products are sophisticated and beautiful, but the actual manufacturing process is actually not that sophisticated. And the way the frames are made is quite old technology, to be honest. It's been around since, tennis rackets were made using bladder molding and things like that. Some of the factories in Asia actually came from the racket sports. So, in terms of manufacturing, is a very mature thing. So, there's not a lot of differentiation. So every frame that we produce and every frame that you see at the World Tour, there's somebody, you know, with their little hands putting the carbon fiber into a mold, and then putting it all into a heated process to make that carbon fiber frame. So every frame is handmade. Okay, I mean, I guess if you go to, say, different materials like steel, aluminum, or titanium, there's a certain artistry around, the welding joints, making the beads look really beautiful, especially, let's say, with the titanium frame. But intrinsically, that's still a handmade process, right? And so far, you know, I've not seen any evidence where a small little factory, in Europe, with people in lab coats can make a better frame than a factory in Asia who's making
Hmm.
a lot of them repeatedly and having processes to be able to do it repeatedly at a certain quality. There is just no evidence that one is better than the other. This whole argument about whether a frame is inferior because it's made in Asia or not, it's not something I buy into. At the end of the day, as a business, you need to be able to be profitable through being able to achieve reasonable margins, and just not available outside of Asia. And it doesn't, and I've always had the philosophy that it actually doesn't matter where you make the frame, so long as
Exactly.
you develop a really great relationship with the manufacturer and that you work in hand to create great products. Does it really matter where it was made? Does it make any difference? A bike
No,
is as good anywhere it's made, as long as the quality is up to spec, as long as the quality control and the various different KPIs are held to good standard.
great. Quick fire questions, just two, and we can sadly wrap up. Favorite cycling destination? Where?
Chiang Mai, Thailand. It's just become this mecca of Asian cycling. It's got beautiful scenery. fantastic mountains, and the coffee there is just the best. And of course, cycling and coffee just go hand in hand.
Bucket list. What is a non-cycling design or piece of art that inspires you?
Probably the Swiss Re building, also called the Gherkin, designed by Foster and Partners in London. Stunning building, almost like a sculpture in its own right.
Mike, don't want to do that, but we need to, wrap up, finish. Can I ask you final thoughts? What's next for chapter 2?
I think there's a few different projects that we're working on, and they're not completely different from what we're doing already, but they're obviously tweaks and improvements, and also reacting to various different trends, especially in the gravel market where tire size and tire clearance is critical. So we are working on a new gravel bike, but we don't have a release date. It's more likely to be in 2027 because whilst we want to work quickly, we also want to make sure that we get everything perfect and correct for the marketplace. In terms of personal aspirations, I think we want the business obviously to be able to get through these tough times. And, I think we're in a good position to be able to do that. And, everybody in the industry really hopes that, in 2026, people will start buying bikes again and start going out there and riding more.
Perfect. And great. Mike, last one. Is there any or will be more air artist frames editions? I like the collaborations you did.
Yeah, so we've done 3 so-called artist editions in the last, I guess, probably 3 years. We did one with Caitlin Fielder, which is a local New Zealand artist. She's very famous for painting pro cycling shoes and stuff like that. And there's a New Zealand connection there. And then we did one with an artist called Bradley Harms on the Coco. And more recently, we did one with TJ Eisenhart, who's an ex-pro rider who's got a pretty crazy vision for things in life. And that's been a great collab. And actually, that particular colorway sells really well. We're very careful about who we want to work with. And we certainly get a lot of people reaching out saying, "Oh, we love what you guys are doing on the artist edition. Can you work with me, or can we do a collab?" And it's just got to feel right. And it's something you can't force. We don't actively look for it, but when it lands on the desk, it's kind of like, yes, this one makes sense. We'll do this. We're always on the, hopeful that something like that will happen, but it's a tricky one because it's got to fit the brand DNA. It's got to fit their DNA. It's important their personality shines through the product. And, those things often don't align, but in the 3 that we've done so far, they've worked really well.
Yeah, they're amazing. Well, that's it for today. I can't thank you enough. It's just, an honor. I've always been a fan of, of your work, the brand itself, the frames. Chapter2bikes.com and socials.
Yep.
Is that right?
Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, the usual suspects. You'll see all the links on the website. And if anybody wants to reach out, the emails are there as well.
Great. I'll put the details down below. And Mike, thank you so much again. Hope to see you live one day soon.
Yeah, well, hopefully in Chiang Mai we can ride together.
Yeah, myself on an e-bike maybe.
I'm sure we can organize that.
Great. Now I'll go the rear 650 gram frame for sure. 1x13 speed, probably 34.52. Yeah, great.
Okay, Fernando.
Thank you
really
so much.
Appreciate inviting me on this podcast of yours. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you. Have a great day.
All right.